When my aunt left me her farmland, I never expected to wake up to bulldozers and a homeowners association claiming they owned my property for a new airport expansion. What would you do if you discovered the one legal loophole that could save your home and expose a corrupt scheme threatening your entire town? The phone rang as I was preparing dinner. "Miss Carter, I'm sorry to inform you that your Aunt Margaret has passed away." I dropped my wooden spoon, splattering tomato sauce across my white kitchen tiles. Aunt Margaret was my last living relative. "She left you her entire estate," the lawyer continued, "including the 25-acre farm outside Brookhaven Valley. I never expected to own farmland at 35. I work in public relations, for goodness sake. I can barely keep succulents alive." But the next day, as I stood on that sprawling property with its weathered gray barn and endless fields, something inside me shifted. "Your aunt refused every offer to sell," the lawyer explained, handing me a thick folder. "Even when they built Crestwood Meadows right next door." Crestwood Meadows, the upscale neighborhood where I had bought my townhouse just last year. The irony wasn't lost on me. "These are the property deeds, water rights, and boundary maps," he added. "Margaret was meticulous about keeping them organized." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my back porch, staring at the distant silhouette of my new barn against the starlit sky. The farm, my farm. What would I even do with it? The doorbell rang at exactly 7:30 the next morning. I opened it, still in my pajamas, to find a woman with immaculately styled silver hair and 3 men in tailored suits standing on my doorstep. Rachel Carter. The woman's smile was tight, rehearsed. "I'm Judith Collins, president of the Crestwood Meadows Homeowners Association. May we come in?" Before I could respond, they swept past me into the living room. Judith perched on the edge of my couch like she was afraid it might stain her clothes. "We understand you've inherited Margaret Carter's property," she said, opening a leather portfolio. "We'd like to make you an offer." One of the men, Harold Thompson, introduced as a representative from the city council, slid a document across my coffee table. "We're prepared to offer you $800,000 for the entire parcel." I nearly choked on my coffee. That was less than half its actual worth. Judith's smile didn't falter. "Your aunt let that land sit idle for years. We're being more than generous." Something about her tone made my skin crawl. I had dealt with enough pushy executives in my career to recognize the tactic. "I need time to think about it," I replied. Judith stood abruptly. "We don't have time, Rachel. The Crestwood Meadows Regional Airport project begins next week." "Airport?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "What airport?" "The board voted unanimously last month," she said, as if explaining to a child. "Your aunt's farm is the last piece we need for the runway extension." A jet roared overhead, flying lower than seemed normal. "That's my property," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Judith's smile turned cold. "Actually, we can. Check your HOA agreement, Section 52C. All properties adjoining Crestwood Meadows fall under our expanded jurisdiction for community improvement projects." She handed me a blue folder. "Our final offer expires tomorrow at noon. Be reasonable, Rachel. You don't want to fight the entire community on this." After they left, I called in sick and drove straight to my aunt's farm. Construction vehicles were already lined up along the road. Workers in yellow vests were planting survey stakes in the fields. I parked and marched toward them, waving my arms. "Hey, what are you doing?" A worker looked up, startled. "Ma'am, this is private property," I shouted, pointing at the stakes. "Who authorized this?" "We have permits," he said, pulling out his phone to show me digital copies signed by the city council and HOA yesterday. Yesterday, before they had even made me an offer. I yanked one of the stakes from the ground. "Get off my land, now!" The worker spoke into his radio, and soon a supervisor approached. "Miss Carter, I presume. I'm Daniel Ortiz, project foreman. I understand you're upset, but we have all the proper authorizations." From who? Not from me. I clutched the wooden stake like a weapon. Daniel looked uneasy. "Look, I'm just doing my job. If you have concerns, you'll need to take it up with the HOA or the city council." I spent the rest of the day calling every official I could reach. The town clerk seemed sympathetic, but said all permits were in order. The county commissioner never returned my calls. The one lawyer who answered quoted a retainer fee that made my stomach sink. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by Aunt Margaret's paperwork, feeling utterly defeated. A knock at my back door startled me. Through the glass, I saw an older man with gray hair and heavy eyebrows. I recognized him as my neighbor from 2 doors down.
"Miss Carter," he said when I cracked the door open. "I'm Damon Harris. I saw what happened at your farm today." "You mean when I made a fool of myself yelling at construction workers?" I asked bitterly. "When you stood up to Judith Collins's bulldozers," he corrected. "May I come in? I think you need an ally." Damon, it turned out, was a retired judge who had been watching Judith's schemes for years. "She runs the HOA like her personal kingdom," he explained, examining my aunt's papers. "Her husband owns half the commercial real estate in town, and her son-in-law's construction company just happens to win every development bid." "But an airport?" I asked. "That's so extreme." "It's not about transportation," Damon said grimly. "It's about money. Once that land is rezoned for commercial use, its value multiplies tenfold. The noise will drive down residential property values, and the Collins family will swoop in to buy everything cheap." I pushed my hair back from my face. What can I do? I can't afford to fight them. Damon adjusted his glasses, studying the HOA agreement Judith had left. "Every legal strategy has a weakness," he murmured. "We just need to find Judith's." We worked past midnight, digging through every document. I was ready to give up when Damon pulled out an ancient property survey from Aunt Margaret's files. "Rachel, look at this," he said, voice suddenly animated. "The property line doesn't match the current county records." I leaned over to see. "What does that mean?" "It means," Damon said, eyes twinkling, "that we need to check the original deed against the HOA incorporation documents." 3 hours and 2 pots of coffee later, we found it. A tiny detail buried in 40 years of paperwork. When Aunt Margaret bought the farm in 1978, the previous owner had joined the newly formed HOA. But Margaret never signed the updated agreement when the HOA expanded its jurisdiction in 1995. "The HOA has no authority over your land," Damon whispered, hands trembling with excitement. "Judith's entire airport project hinges on the document your aunt never signed." Just as dawn broke across my kitchen window, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Judith bribed the county inspector. Airport isn't up to FAA safety codes. I have proof. Meet me at the old mill at noon. Come alone." "Marcus?" I stared at Damon, heart pounding. "Who's Marcus?" "Judith's former assistant," he replied, face grim. "He was fired last month after questioning some financial discrepancies. If he's reaching out, this could be bigger than we thought." The old mill stood at the edge of town, its weathered wooden walls slumping toward the river. I parked my car behind a cluster of trees and checked my phone again. No more messages from the mysterious Marcus. "Hello?" I called, pushing open the creaking door. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams streaming through broken windows. "Anyone here?" A shadow moved in the corner. A man stepped forward, thin, nervous, with darting eyes and rumpled clothes. "Miss Carter?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm Marcus Dawson. Thank you for coming." "You said you have proof about the airport?" I asked, staying near the door. Marcus glanced anxiously out the window before pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "I worked for Judith Collins for 3 years. I handled all the HOA paperwork, including the airport project." He handed me the drive with shaking fingers. "It's not just an airport. It's a private cargo terminal for her husband's shipping company. The environmental impact study was completely falsified. They bribed safety inspectors. The runway design violates at least 6 FAA regulations." My mind raced. If that was true, it wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. "Judith has half the city council in her pocket," Marcus continued, pulling out more documents. "These are copies of emails between her and Councilman Thompson discussing how they'll split the profits from property devaluation." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, suspicious of his motives. Marcus looked down. "I helped them at first. I didn't ask questions when Judith told me to backdate documents or adjust meeting minutes. But then I found out they're planning to drain the protected wetlands on the east side of your property, home to endangered frogs found nowhere else in the state." "You care about frogs?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "My daughter does," he replied, voice cracking. "She's 8, loves amphibians, wants to be a biologist. How could I face her knowing I helped destroy something she loves?" His raw emotion convinced me. I tucked the USB drive into my pocket. "What happens now?" I asked. "There's an emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7, Marcus said. "Judith's announcing the final timeline. She doesn't know we've discovered your aunt never signed the jurisdiction agreement." When I returned home, Damon was waiting with more news. He had enlisted his daughter Zoe, an environmental attorney from the city. "We can file for an emergency injunction on 2 grounds," Zoe explained, spreading documents across my dining table. "First, the HOA lacks jurisdiction over your property. Second, the environmental impact study fraudulently conceals the threat to protected species." I watched them work, these strangers who had become my allies overnight. "Why are you helping me?"
Damon looked up, his eyes serious. "Because Judith Collins has been bullying this town for 20 years. Someone needs to stand up to her." As evening approached, we finalized our strategy. I would attend the HOA meeting with copies of my aunt's original deed. While Zoe prepared to file our injunction first thing tomorrow, the community center buzzed with tension when I arrived. At least 50 neighbors packed the room, some curious, others concerned. I recognized Thomas Wilkins, who had complained about my garden gnomes last month, and Cynthia Patel, whose wind chimes drove me crazy on breezy nights. Judith stood at the podium, resplendent in an expensive blue suit, flanked by Councilman Thompson and Daniel, the construction foreman.
As you know, she began, the Crestwood Meadows Regional Airport project enters its final phase tomorrow. We'll begin clearing the old Carter property at dawn. She clicked to a slide showing architectural renderings of a gleaming airport terminal. This facility will put our community on the map, she continued smugly. Property values for homes along the main access road will increase by up to 20%. I couldn't help myself. What about the homes near the runway, the ones that will have cargo planes flying overhead at all hours? What happens to their value? Every head turned toward me. Judith's smile hardened. Miss Carter, how nice of you to join us. I understand you've declined our generous offer for your property. I declined because it wasn't yours to take, I replied, standing up. My aunt's farm is not under HOA jurisdiction and never has been. The room fell silent. Judith laughed dismissively. That's absurd. Your property is clearly listed in our records. I opened my folder and pulled out the key document. My aunt never signed the 1995 expanded jurisdiction agreement. The previous owner did, but that obligation didn't transfer when she purchased the property. I handed copies to several nearby neighbors. The HOA has no legal authority to seize my land for any project, let alone an airport that violates FAA safety regulations. Councilman Thompson stepped forward, face flushed. These are serious allegations, Miss Carter. Where exactly did you get your information? From the county recorder's office, I replied calmly, where public records are available to anyone who looks. The room erupted in confused chatter. Thomas Wilkins stood up. Judith, is this true? Does she own that land free and clear? Of course not, Judith snapped. This is a desperate attempt to extract more money from the community fund. We've already invested millions in this project. Cynthia Patel raised her hand. I'd like to see the original signed agreement, please. My husband's a real estate attorney, and he always says jurisdiction requires explicit consent. Judith's composure cracked. This meeting is about construction updates, not legal technicalities. Actually, I interjected, pulling the USB drive from my pocket. We should also discuss the environmental impact study that conveniently omits the protected wetlands and endangered meadow-spotted frogs on the eastern parcel. Judith's eyes locked on the drive, then darted to the back of the room, where Marcus stood quietly. Her face turned ashen. This meeting is adjourned, she declared, slamming her gavel down. But the damage was done. Neighbors clustered around me, examining the documents, asking questions. Some expressed outrage at being misled. Others worried about their investments in the project. As the crowd dispersed, Judith cornered me by the exit, her voice a venomous whisper. You have no idea what you've started, Rachel. My husband has friends in every courthouse in this county. By tomorrow, your precious farmland will be under eminent domain proceedings. Is that a threat? I asked, meeting her gaze steadily. It's a promise, she replied. You can't win this. That night, as I drove home under a canopy of stars, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A black SUV followed me, staying uncomfortably close. When I turned onto my street, it accelerated, pulling alongside me. The window lowered, and I glimpsed Councilman Thompson's face, contorted with anger. "Back off, Carter," he shouted before the SUV sped away. I pulled into my driveway with shaking hands, only to find my front door standing open, lights blazing inside. Had I left it unlocked? No. I distinctly remember Damon setting the alarm when we left.
Heart pounding, I called the police, then waited in my car until I saw the patrol cars flashing lights. The officer found no intruders, but my aunt's papers were scattered across the floor. My computer screen was smashed. "They're trying to scare you," Damon said when he arrived, surveying the damage. "It means we're winning, or it means they're desperate," Zoe added, picking up torn documents. "We need to secure these files somewhere safe." As we gathered the papers, my phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered wearily. "Miss Carter." The voice was unfamiliar, male, professional. "This is Richard Collins, Judith's husband. I understand you've caused quite a stir tonight." My blood ran cold. "Mr. Collins." "No need for explanations," he interrupted smoothly. "I'd like to meet tomorrow to discuss a solution that works for everyone. Shall we say breakfast at the Brookhaven Country Club, 9 o'clock? Oh, and Rachel, bring the USB drive. Consider it your ticket of admission."
The line went dead. I looked at Damon and Zoe, their faces reflecting my own fear. What do I do now? Zoe's expression hardened. "We make copies of everything right now. Then we call every news outlet in the state." Damon nodded grimly. "And tomorrow we spring our trap. Richard Collins just invited the fox into the henhouse, but he doesn't realize the fox brings friends." My hands shook as I pulled into the parking lot of the old mill. Was I walking into a trap? The mysterious text from Marcus could be Judith's way of catching me alone. I gripped my pepper spray and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The smell of dust and forgotten grain filled my nose. "Hello?" My voice echoed. Marcus, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, stepped from the shadows. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. "Miss Carter, I worked for Judith until last week." His eyes darted to the windows. "We don't have much time." He handed me a coffee-stained manila folder. I was ordered to shred these, but I made copies first. Inside were blueprints, emails, and bank statements. My stomach dropped as I flipped through them. This isn't a small regional airport. These are cargo facilities, Marcus nodded. Judith's husband owns Apex Shipping. They need a private terminal for their overseas business. The public airport story is just cover. I pointed to a map. This runway cuts right through my aunt's pond. That's why they need my land specifically. Marcus glanced at his watch nervously. The geography makes it perfect for their runway needs. But why rush the construction? Why not just offer to buy my land properly? Because of this. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing me an email. Their biggest competitor is building a similar facility 50 miles away. Whoever finishes first gets the exclusive government contract. I took photos of everything with my phone. "Thank you for this. Why are you helping me?" Marcus's face darkened. "Judith fired me after 10 years because I questioned the environmental report, said I wasn't a team player. Then she made sure no one else in town would hire me." The mill door banged open. We both jumped. "Marcus, your car's outside. What are you doing here?" It was Daniel, the construction foreman. "Just grabbing some old records," Marcus lied, but I could see Daniel didn't believe him. "Judith's called an emergency HOA meeting tonight," Daniel said, eyes narrowing. "You both should be there." 3 hours later, I walked into the packed community center. Neighbors I barely knew filled every seat. Judith stood at the podium in a crisp blue suit, talking about minimal noise disruption and property value increases. My heart pounded. I clutched my aunt's original deed and waited for my moment. "Any questions before we vote on the noise abatement budget?" Judith asked, scanning the room but avoiding my eyes. I stood up. I have a question. The room went quiet. Judith's smile flickered. I continued, walking toward the front. The airport project is illegal. My farm was never under HOA jurisdiction. Judith laughed, but I heard the strain in her voice. That's ridiculous. Your property is clearly listed in our records. I placed the original deed on the table. My Aunt Margaret never signed your agreement when she bought the land in 1978. The previous owner had joined, but the membership wasn't automatically transferred. It required a new signature. I pulled out my phone and showed photos of the documents Marcus had given me. And I know the real reason for rushing this project. It's not a public airport at all. Gasps filled the room as neighbors saw the cargo terminal plans. Thomas Wilkins, who'd left nasty notes about my garden gnomes just last month, jumped to his feet. You told us this would be a small commuter airport, not a 24-hour cargo hub. Cynthia Patel, whose wind chimes kept me awake all summer, turned on Judith. Where are the environmental impact studies? My grandchildren swim in the creek downstream from that land. Judith's face flushed red. This meeting is adjourned, she shouted, banging her gavel. You can't adjourn without a vote, someone yelled. We need to see the financial statements, shouted another. Judith signaled to two board members who quickly escorted her from the room as chaos erupted. I felt a tap on my shoulder. Daniel stood there, eyes troubled. They're starting construction tomorrow at dawn, with or without permits. I pushed through the crowd toward the exit, hoping to catch Judith, but she was already speeding away in her luxury SUV. My neighbor Damon caught up with me in the parking lot. You stirred up quite a hornet's nest in there. I had to tell everyone the truth, I said. Truth won't stop bulldozers, he warned. Judith has powerful friends. I drove home slowly, mind racing with what to do next. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a dark car parked across from my house. It pulled away as soon as my headlights hit it. Inside, I double-checked all my locks and called Zoe, Damon's daughter, who practiced environmental law. She promised to come first thing in the morning to help file an emergency injunction. I drifted into an uneasy sleep around midnight, only to jolt awake at the sound of breaking glass. Heart racing, I grabbed my phone and crept downstairs. My living room window was shattered. A brick lay on the carpet, wrapped in a note, "Sell now or regret it." Through the broken window, I saw dark figures retreating across my front lawn. Too frightened to chase them, I called the police instead. Officer Miller arrived 20 minutes later, taking notes with a bored expression. "Probably just kids," he said, despite the type threat. "Kids don't typically demand I sell my property," I pointed out. He shrugged. "Not much we can do without witnesses or video." As he left, my phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. "They're coming for the farm at dawn. Bring help, Marcus." Blue and red lights flashed across my living room walls as I frantically threw clothes into a backpack. Marcus's warning about dawn was serious. I needed to reach my farm before Judith's crew did. I dialed Damon for help, but his phone went straight to voicemail. A glance at the clock showed 4:47 a.m., too early for most neighbors to answer. Headlights swept across my curtains. I peeked outside to see a black truck pulling up. Not Judith's people, but Daniel, the construction foreman. I yanked open the door before he could knock. "Daniel, what are you doing here?"
Judith called an emergency crew meeting for 5 o'clock a.m. They're bringing heavy equipment to your farm right now. He wiped sweat from his forehead. I couldn't sleep knowing what they're planning to do. We raced to my farm in his truck, bumping down the dirt road as first light crept across the fields. My heart stopped when we reached the gate. A chain-link fence now surrounded my entire property, with bright orange signs every 20 feet. Eminent domain, government acquisition. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "They can't just take my land overnight." 3 bulldozers and a backhoe already waited inside the fence. Workers in yellow vests moved around them like ants. "Judith's husband pulled strings with Judge Thompson," Daniel explained. "Got an emergency order signed last night." I rattled the padlocked gate. "This is still my property. They can't lock me out." Daniel pointed to a woman in a white hard hat. "That's Judith's right hand, Margaret. She has the court papers." I marched up to the fence. "Margaret, open this gate right now. This is my farm." She smiled without warmth and walked over, clipboard in hand. "Miss Carter, you've been properly served with eminent domain papers." She slid a thick envelope through the fence. "This land now belongs to the Brooklyn Regional Development Authority." "What authority? I've never even heard of it." "It was chartered last night," Margaret replied, "for public transportation needs." Daniel whistled low. "They created a whole new government body just to take your land." I pulled out my phone to call for help, but the signal showed nothing. Margaret smirked, pointing to a portable signal jammer on their truck. "That's illegal," I shouted. "File a complaint," she suggested, walking back toward the bulldozers. "Construction starts in 10 minutes. Daniel touched my shoulder. "I know another way in through the woods on the north side." We raced around the property line. A small creek marked the boundary where the fence ended. They hadn't finished the entire perimeter yet. We splashed across the shallow water and ran toward the bulldozers. I planted myself directly in front of the lead machine. "Stop! This is private property." The driver, a young man I didn't recognize, looked uncertainly toward Margaret. "Remove her," Margaret ordered 2 security guards. As they approached, my phone suddenly beeped with incoming messages. The jammer must have malfunctioned. I quickly hit the video button and started live streaming to my social media. "I'm being forcibly removed from my own property by hired guards after an HOA illegally claimed eminent domain overnight." The guards hesitated, unwilling to be recorded manhandling me. Margaret stormed over. "Turn that off immediately." "Make me," I challenged, backing away to keep filming. "I'm standing on my own property, which has never been part of the HOA. I have documentation proving it." The sound of car doors slamming made us all turn. Damon's silver sedan had arrived, followed by his daughter Zoe in her own car. "Rachel, don't say another word," Zoe called, hurrying toward us with a leather briefcase. She faced Margaret. "I'm Zoe Harris, environmental attorney. Those bulldozers aren't moving an inch today." Margaret crossed her arms. "We have an emergency eminent domain order signed by Judge Thompson at 11 p.m. in his living room." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "I've already filed for an emergency stay with the state court. It was granted 20 minutes ago." She handed Margaret a document. "This property remains in Miss Carter's possession until a proper hearing." Margaret's face darkened as she scanned the paper. This doesn't change anything. We'll have this overturned by noon. Maybe, Zoe agreed, but those machines can't move until then. The victory was short-lived. By afternoon, I discovered my house water had been shut off due to emergency pipeline maintenance that somehow only affected my property. The next day, a parking enforcement officer towed my car from my own driveway for unauthorized parking in a zone that hadn't existed the day before. Code violation notices appeared daily in my mailbox. My garbage wasn't collected. Internet service became spotty. "They're trying to break you down," Damon explained as we sat in his kitchen, the only safe place to talk. "Make your daily life so miserable you'll give up." "It's working," I admitted, exhausted after a week of harassment. "I can't even take a shower in my own home." Zoe spread papers across the table. The judge granted them another hearing for Friday. Judith's husband has friends everywhere. "We need more ammunition," Damon said. "The legal fight could drag on for months." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Meet me. New information. Critical." This time we met in a crowded coffee shop downtown. Marcus looked even worse than before, dark circles under his eyes. "I accessed Judith's private emails," he whispered, sliding a USB drive across the table. "She lied to the FAA about the wetland assessment on your property." I plugged it into Zoe's laptop. Photos showed the pond on my farm labeled as seasonal drainage rather than the permanent wetland it actually was. "This is huge," Zoe breathed. "That pond hosts protected species, the Brookhaven spotted frog. It has special environmental protections. We can get an emergency injunction," she continued excitedly. "But we need to file before they drain the wetlands this weekend." "How do you know their timeline?" I asked Marcus. "They've ordered pumping equipment," he explained, "scheduled for Saturday morning when government offices are closed." Friday afternoon, Zoe and I headed to the courthouse to file our emergency environmental injunction. As we drove along the empty country road, a black SUV appeared in my rearview mirror, gaining speed. "Someone's following us," I warned. The SUV accelerated, pulling alongside before swerving sharply into our lane. Zoe yanked the wheel, sending us skidding onto the shoulder. My head slammed against the window as we spun to a stop. The SUV blocked our path. Two men in dark suits stepped out, approaching our car with measured steps. One tapped on my window. "Miss Carter, Mr. Collins would like to discuss a generous settlement offer." "Right now, get in the car," I whispered to Zoe as the men approached. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching, and we escaped down a dirt road. My hands shook on the steering wheel. These people weren't just annoying neighbors anymore. They were dangerous. "Did you see their faces?" Zoe asked, her calm cracking. "That was Victor Collins's head of security. Judith doesn't send him unless it's serious." My phone exploded with notifications. Someone had posted my personal information online, claiming I was blocking essential transportation infrastructure that would bring jobs to Brookhaven Valley. "They're trying to turn everyone against you," Zoe said, scrolling through the posts. Classic intimidation tactic. I pulled over suddenly, feeling sick. I can't win against these people. They have money, connections, lawyers. A gentle knock on my window made me jump.
It was Thomas Wilkins, the neighbor who'd complained endlessly about my garden gnomes. "Followed you when I saw Collins's goons," he said gruffly. "You okay?" Back at my house, a surprise waited. My porch was crowded with neighbors I barely knew. Thomas, Cynthia Patel, the Rodriguez family from down the street, and at least a dozen others. "We saw what happened on the highway," Thomas explained. "Judith's gone too far." Cynthia stepped forward, nervously twisting her hands. "My brother works for the county clerk. The council's holding a closed emergency session tonight to fast-track the eminent domain claim." "But why help me?" I asked. "I thought everyone wanted this airport." Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. "Judith told us it would be a small regional airport bringing jobs, not a 24/7 cargo hub that would shake our houses and pollute our air. She lied to all of us," added Mr. Patel from across the street. "My cousin works construction. He says they're planning a fuel depot right next to the elementary school playground." I invited everyone inside. My dining room transformed into war headquarters as neighbors shared information. The Rodriguez family, who owned the local printing shop, offered to make hundreds of flyers. Thomas, surprisingly skilled with social media, created a community page that gained hundreds of followers within hours. Cynthia's church group volunteered to hold a prayer vigil outside the county building, effectively a protest. "Look at this," Zoe said, examining the eminent domain paperwork. Cynthia's brother had secretly copied the environmental impact statement. It was missing key signatures, and the wetland assessment was dated before they had even done the survey. By dawn, our plan was in motion while Zoe prepared emergency legal filings. Teams of neighbors delivered flyers throughout Crestwood Meadows and nearby communities.
The Rodriguez family's teenage son, a talented artist, painted a giant banner, "Save our wetlands from corporate greed." Local news vans parked outside my house as Damon, using his former judge connections, arranged interviews. I felt my stomach twist as I stepped in front of the cameras, but the words flowed naturally. "This isn't about one farm," I explained. "It's about powerful people breaking rules that the rest of us have to follow." By noon, social media buzzed with our story. The county commissioner, feeling the heat, called Zoe directly to express concerns about procedural irregularities. "They're backing down," Zoe whispered, covering the phone. "He wants a private meeting." Just as hope flickered, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Judith stepped out, her perfect hair and makeup contrasting with the dark circles under her eyes. "Name your price," she demanded, not bothering with a greeting. "Everyone has one. I don't want money," I replied, arms crossed. "I want my farm back, and for you to resign from the board." Judith laughed bitterly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "My husband has just been served federal subpoenas," Damon interrupted, walking up my driveway with a thick envelope. "The EPA and FA are very interested in those falsified environmental reports." Judith's face went white. "This isn't over," she whispered, retreating to her luxury SUV. That night, as my new allies celebrated in my living room, Marcus called with an urgent warning. "They're moving equipment onto the wetlands now. They're going to drain it before the injunction. If those rare frogs disappear, you lose your strongest legal claim."
I looked around at my neighbors, people who had once fined me for my garden gnomes, now standing ready to fight. "We need to go there now," I said. "Who's with me?" Every hand in the room shot up. Headlights cut through the darkness as our caravan of cars bumped down the muddy access road toward the wetlands. I gripped the steering wheel, stomach churning at what we might find. Behind me followed 20 neighbors who, just last week, had been strangers. "Look!" gasped Zoe from the passenger seat. Ahead, powerful floodlights illuminated the marshy area. Workers in safety vests positioned massive pumps at the water's edge. A bulldozer idled nearby, its engine rumbling in the night. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out, my shoes sinking into soft mud. "Stop right now!" I shouted, running toward the nearest worker. "This area is protected habitat." Jack, the construction foreman I recognized from earlier confrontations, stepped forward with a clipboard. "Ms. Carter, I have direct orders. Please leave or I'll call security." "Call whoever you want," Thomas yelled as neighbors poured from their vehicles. "And Channel 7 News," added Mrs. Rodriguez, holding up her phone. "They're on their way." Jack glanced nervously at his crew. "Look, I'm just doing my job." "By destroying endangered frog habitat?" I challenged. "You know that's illegal, right? Everyone here is a witness." Cynthia stepped forward with her church friends. "We're not leaving," she said quietly. "We'll form a human chain if necessary." And that's exactly what they did. Neighbors who had once complained about my mailbox color now linked arms around the perimeter of the wetland. Mr. Patel, who had argued with me over fence height regulations, now stood shoulder to shoulder with Thomas, who had once reported my holiday decorations. Jack radioed someone, speaking in urgent tones. The workers milled about uncertainly. "Turn off those pumps," demanded, his former judge's authority evident in his voice. To my amazement, one worker nodded and hit the kill switch. The pumps sputtered into silence. "You'll all regret this," Jack warned, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. In the distance, police lights flashed. 2 state environmental officers arrived, followed closely by a news van. The officers immediately began taking water samples and photographs, while a reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "Miss Carter, can you tell us why you and your neighbors are out here at 1 in the morning?" As dawn broke pink across the sky, a black Cadillac Escalade screeched to a halt. Judith and Victor Collins emerged, their faces twisted with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Victor shouted. "I paid good money for these permits." "Bribed money, you mean," replied loudly, ensuring the nearby reporter could hear. "The EPA has those emails now." Judith lunged toward me, finger pointing. "You stupid, stubborn woman! Do you have any idea what you've cost us?" "About as much as you tried to cost me," I replied evenly. "My home, my land, my peace." Over the next hours, officials arrived in waves. County inspectors, state wildlife experts, even 2 FBI agents interested in the interstate fraud aspects of the case. The environmental officers confirmed the presence of the endangered Brooklyn spotted frogs, dozens of them, protected by federal law. By noon, yellow tape surrounded the entire area. Protected habitat and no entry sprouted like mushrooms.
The Collinses watched from their car, faces pale, as their dreams of a private cargo hub dissolved. The next weeks brought revelations that shocked even me. Thomas, digging through town archives, discovered the original airport proposal.
The runway wasn't just illegal, it was physically impossible. Look at these gradient calculations, Zoe said, spreading the papers on my kitchen table. No plane could safely land on a slope this steep. They never intended to build a functional airport. I realized once the land was rezoned for commercial use, they'd claim engineering difficulties and convert it to a shopping mall. Damon nodded. Classic bait and switch. 3 months later, I stood in the middle of my farmland, watching as neighbors planting rows of vegetable seedlings. The community garden project had been Thomas's idea, a way to share the bounty of the land while preserving the vital wetland area. Judith and Victor Collins had resigned from the HOA board and moved away amid multiple investigations. The new board, led by Thomas and Mrs. Rodriguez, had rewritten the bylaws to prevent similar schemes. Cynthia approached, offering me a glass of lemonade. "The tomatoes are coming in nicely," she said, nodding toward where her grandchildren carefully watered seedlings. "Who would have thought?" I laughed. "A few months ago you were threatening to find me over my garden gnomes." She smiled sheepishly. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to see what really matters." Damon joined us, leaning on his cane. "What will you do with the rest of the land?" he asked. I looked around at the neighbors working together, at children playing near the protected wetland where frogs hopped freely. The same people who once filled my mailbox with HOA violations now filled my heart with gratitude. Uncle Derek always said, "Good fences make good neighbors," I replied. But he was wrong. Good neighbors don't need fences at all. In the distance, a family of Brookfield-spotted frogs croaked happily in their protected home. The small legal detail that had saved not just my farm, but our entire community.